This is Jim Fetzer, your host on The Real Deal, where I have a special show tonight with two guests, Clare Kuehn in Canada, Nick Kollerstrom in the UK, and we're going to be talking about the ever controversial issue of whether the Paul McCartney, who's the one of the two apparent survivors of the Beatles, along with Ringo Starr, actually is the Paul McCartney of Liverpool, with whom the band began, or whether it may be the case that Paul McCartney, the original Paul, died in 1966 and was replaced by someone else, possibly someone by the name of William Shepard, an issue we'll discuss in the course of our conversation. I must say, not only has this been by far the most controversial topic ever to be discussed on this show, but it's generated a huge number of comments in the discussion threads, over 400 at this point in time. Nick, welcome to the show.
Hi, Jim. Yeah, it's a pleasure to be back here again on this dynamic subject that's somehow resurfaced.
And Claire, welcome to the show again.
Thank you, both of you.
Nick, I think I'm going to give you the honor here of making an opening statement about all this, since I've had Claire on before about it, but I think possibly not you.
Okay, so. Jim. Well, this is the greatest urban legend in the history of rock and roll. And personally, I went to school and grew up around Abbey Road. I used to walk past that street. And when George Harrison died, I pottered around there looking at all the flowers and messages, and I've lived quite near where Paul McCartney lived in St John's Wood in London. And in the Summer of Love and Peace, when Sgt. Pepper came out, I have some memory of some great acid trips, because I happened to be out on the west coast of America then. So I feel like it means a lot to me, this subject, And the reason it's come up is that there's this and some new book, which none of us three have actually read, called The Memoirs of Billy Shears, which is quite expensive. And it's dedicated and acknowledges Sir Paul McCartney, and is published by some sort of McCartney Press, and clearly it's an account in the first person of the new replacement of McCartney, describing sort of deep inner experiences and dreams and so on, whereby he was moulded and made to replace the old Paul, and I think there's no way that could come out if it were a fake without Sir Paul suing on it. The fact that it's got his name, used his name, I think this gives us some primary validation of this awesome myth. A myth, I may say, which blossomed in America. Very much an American myth, this, Jim. In '69, the story blossomed, and you got massive sales of the old Beatles albums, of 67 to from 67 to 69. They all went up into the charts again as everyone started listening to this myth, and a whole lot of tribute songs came out to the dead, mourning the dead Paul. Right? Get this: Brother Paul, So Long Paul, the Ballad of Paul, Saint Paul, and so on, mourning this adored central character of the Beatles, and we're here to evaluate a choice between two issues.
Well,
one, was this... Sorry?
Go ahead.
Yeah, was there some strange Tavistock Clinic programming of somebody so that they could step in? And a whole lot of vast implications, apparently impossible. The idea of wanting to do that in a pop group. Both the Stones and the Beatles had their central, most adored character mysteriously die off. Is that what we're saying? The alternative, I'd just like to consider the alternative, because we three all believe in the Paul is dead hypothesis. The alternative, let me suggest, is that the new Apple Corpse recording studio was starting up in '69, and they needed to promote the sales. So they put out this conspiracy rumour, and maybe they put some clues in the records to make everyone start talking about this story, and that resold a lot of the old records. I think that would be a kind of sensible mainstream view that people might take. And I could add here, just as regards this sensible mainstream view, I've recently gone and checked out the old Beatles fanzines for the autumn of '66, and as you might expect, they just show everything going on happily as before, and the old Beatle looking much the same as the new Beatle, except that early '67 he sports a moustache, and then he does start looking a bit thinner and more different later on in '67.
By way of background, let me read from the description of the contents of the book Billy's Back, which is selections from the memoirs of Billy Shears, which was published on September 9th, 2009. That'll give an idea for the audience of what we're talking about here in relation to this particular source, where I'm inclined to agree with Nick that if this isn't authentic, it sure has a lot of plausibility. Let me read it as follows.
Yeah.
Billy's Back shows how William Shepard, Billy Shears, replaced Paul McCartney in the Beatles, revealing how he went from Billy Pepper of Billy Pepper and the Pepper Pots to Sgt. Pepper of Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, from Billy Pepper to Sgt. Pepper. Replacing Paul saved the Beatles but plagued each band member. Now you can understand the secret messages and see how to verify the proven facts of Paul's death. Besides the many song and album clues that the world has missed until now, you also learn the hard physical evidence. Here are a few examples. Chapter 4 reveals how and why it was proven in court in Germany that the current Paul does not have the same DNA as the earlier Paul McCartney. Chapter 34 identifies the professor in Florida who was the first to publish the fact that the new and old Paul have different voice prints, proving again that they cannot possibly be the same person, since each voice print is as unique as the fingerprints. Chapter 59 recounts the trouble that the current Paul got into Japan when his fingerprints did not match those of the original Paul McCartney. Throughout this book, you will learn to easily recognize their distinct physical differences, their personality differences, and the conspicuous difference in their singing and musical skills. You also come to know the current Paul's inner workings, about how, even now, he deals with the identity switch, and how he continues to work to please the Paul who has crossed over. Billy's Back is the epic of our hero Paul McCartney, who entered the underworld, then returned to us by taking possession of the session musician William Shepard, Billy Shears. This revealing fact-filled work of historical fiction reveals from William's own point of view exactly how the Beatles replaced Paul, what the secret messages really mean, and how you can be certain that they are true. The Paul is Dead story has been told before, but never so authoritatively or with such details of how and why Paul prepared for it, how they made the switch, and how and why William took over the band and the McCartney estate, and how the switch in the band improved the Beatles but tormented them all, especially John and Paul.
Right.
Yeah, when you know what really happened and why, you will never again harbor any doubts about Paul's death and replacement by William. In addition, as you learn the background of the songs cited, you will never again hear those songs the same way. This book will forever change your perception of those songs and of Paul McCartney, John Lennon, the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, the Bonzo Dog Doodah Band, Donovan, The Who, and Elton John, all of whom made songs about Paul's replacement.
Yeah, well, that's a good quote, Jim. Yeah, may I say, Jim, I would like to see a science-based approach here. I'd like to see a physics lab measuring the eye color of Paul McCartney. Okay, the original Paul had these big brown eyes that his fans used to go crazy over. They'd be screaming at this best-looking, most adorable Beatle, had his big brown eyes, and then we move on to today, where Sir Paul has got bright green eyes. We first see those green eyes in the Magical Mystery Tour film, and when he looks into the camera, the words are being sung, "Nothing is real," as you see the new Paul with his green eyes. I would just like to suggest, if anybody wants some sort of physics project, just collect all the photographs of the Beatles where you in color, right? And just measure optically, photometrically measure the eye color, and I'd like to see those plotted on a graph over the years of the change from brown color to green, and I think that graph, just photometric color record of colors in old photographs, I think that would show us the change, the terrific change from August 66, as Claire has so rightly identified, one marvellous pioneer work, August 76 to the new guy appearing in November 66.
Fascinating, Nick. Claire, would you like to make an opening statement now?
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead. Just talk.
Okay. Well, there are a number of features to the things you've discussed that need to be subtly adjusted. First of all, about the eyes, they did do some adjusting in some photographs to make his eyes brown. Some of the close-ups are brown.
Yeah, right, yeah.
Also, people can think that it's a light change. For instance, if you have a side light on an eye, it might turn a brownish eye, a soft brown eye into a yellowy ochre brown eye. And that did happen for Paul in a couple of the original Paul. But what we have with this second Paul is eyes shot with green and yellow. They are a different eye color in some films. So it seems to be they were leaving it in, or it was kind of him being honest a little bit about his own eye color, wanting to have a little bit of the real himself in. Later became Sir Paul, our current Paul McCartney.
Yeah.
It's also very important to know that about these books, there seems to be some, shall we say, skewing of the likely story. You could call it disinformation. Worked in. The best source for a rundown about what's in the books is actually not on Amazon, but on the page itself about the books. There are two main books. There are several others. The two main books, one is the Memoirs of Billy Shears, and on that there's less information. That's the big original full book. Then there's Billy's Back, and the shorter excerpted memoir. That actually has more information on its little blurb. It's at billyshears.com and page 1 or something. Click for it. And in there, it actually mentions some things that are very important, but I'll cover the ones Jim read from Amazon first. The German DNA issue, which I've mentioned before, does not formally prove that, or shall we say, definitively DNA, prove anything, because what happened was they didn't test anyone who definitely was related to Paul McCartney. It was only Sir Paul, whoever he is, and Bettina. So it's
right.
Okay. So
and Paul denies the paternity, doesn't he?
Yes.
So he would just say, well, she's not my daughter, you know?
Right. So the book is if we know that he is different, it is actually a DNA test done and does prove, if he's different, that he isn't related to what is probably Paul's kid. But it wasn't done with a control on it for whether he was Paul McCartney. There's another issue that's mentioned there about the fingerprints. We do know he got into trouble for marijuana. It is likely and has been suspected, and this book takes the position, which is a slight correction there, Jim. It takes the position that he was actually held more for his fingerprints that they had on file. There is no direct evidence for this except for supposition in these books. Also, as I've covered with audio issues, the fellow who did the tests in 1969...
Sorry, hang on, Claire. I thought Sir Paul was detained for a week in Japan because of his fingerprints didn't match.
Marijuana was the official reason.
Yeah, but didn't they say anything was about the fingerprints not matching, or is that just a story?
I found no record.
Oh, I see. Right.
If they did, I'm not aware of it.
Right.
Okay. The issue about what was I saying about the voice prints, as I've covered, the voice prints I've now discovered, if you do a voice print, the standard is only on spoken voice.
Yeah.
The doctor who did the tests in 1969-70. His name is Dr. Henry Truby. He was from Florida, I think Florida University, whatever. We do not have any paper record of his reports. We don't know what he compared, how he compared it. That's number one. We can't do a peer-reviewed study. And also he did the songs, so it wouldn't be officially a comp that could be used, formally speaking, to make the case. What these three things do, though, is they suggest that the DNA, the voice analysis such as it was, and the possibility of the fingerprints is that, well, those would be likely issues if he is replaced. They are probably each examples of the replacement, but it's actually at this point, at the level of conclusive or court level proof, just so that people know. The other thing is that the write-up, and this is my last point in my opening statement about what you've talked about, the write-up that is on billyshears.com about the excerpted memoirs, Billy's Back, taken from the memoir of Billy Shears, which is the bigger book, discuss a number of facts about this Tavistock thing and replacement that are not covered on the Amazon.
Well, can we come to that perhaps later on?
Sure, but it is important what they say. It's very creepy.
We'll get to that by and by, Claire. Now, what you're saying is that with regard to the key points made here, that the DNA hasn't actually been established to be different because you're saying they don't have Paul McCartney's DNA. All they have is Sir Paul.
Sir Paul and Bettina. There was no control for whether he was Paul McCartney.
Yeah. Okay. Well, look. Can we come back to the main story? I think at this point, let's say what is the primary story that we're talking about. Is that all right, you two? If I just
okay. I just want to point out that the book, talks about three proofs, any one of which would be conclusive. Number one, the DNA difference. Number two, the different voice prints. And number three, the fingerprint difference. Any of those would be sufficient to establish that they're not the same person. And what I gather is that although the book is asserting that each of them has been independently established, Claire is denying that that's the case.
Yeah.
Yes, but I do want to just say before we move on to what Nick is, just very briefly, that I do think they're a genuine leak. And I think it because of the overall intensity in the books, the first person style and likeliness of being sued or kept from putting it out if it weren't serious. And it's extremely complex. So I think that what's happening is they've put in a few things that aren't yet, as you say, conclusive, but they're leading people to think about those issues rather than just writing a pure narrative. I do think it's a leak, but I think it has misinformation and half information mixed in.
Yeah.
Well, Claire, you'd surely agree that if any of those three were the case, if they differ in DNA, if they differ in fingerprints, if they differ in voice prints, then they're different.
I already said that that it's likely that these three things actually are quite real and happened. I think Bettina had a very good case about the paternity for the real Paul, but just that it's not quite the way the book claims as conclusive.
Yeah. Okay.
I don't understand what you mean. It's not the way the book claims as conclusive. What do you mean
Well,
by that, Claire?
all she's saying, Jim, is that because Sir Paul was denying the paternity, the fact that there's no DNA similarity could just confirm his case that he's not the father. It's not evidence of any identity about Sir Paul.
There's no control on his DNA for anyone that Paulie really was related to. So all it is between Bettina and Sir Paul, whereas the book little summary is claiming you will find out that it proves that he is not Paul, right? So I'm just making the point
in other words, there are two steps to the proof. One would be whether Sir Paul's DNA corresponds sufficiently to Bettina's to be paternity, for which the answer is no. But then you need Paul's DNA to compare to Bettina, for which the answer might well be yes. And if that were the case, then you'd have what you needed to establish that Sir Paul
Yeah.
and Paul are not the same person.
Yeah. Okay. Well, look. Can we just come back to what happened at the crucial summer of '66?
Yes.
I think that this is really the all-important bit of the story. We've got the most famous band in the world at the very apogee of its career, and there was a mania going on, a Beatlemania, and then suddenly at that very, very brilliant highest point of popularity, it's announced that they will never perform again. And that's the end of August. And then in October, the month of October, Paul is not seen at all. The other Beatles go off on foreign holidays. They want to get away from it. George goes off to India. Ringo and John go off to Spain. And they're all kind of broken up. And I noticed that Brian Epstein was in a hospital, suffering from some sort of trauma. It's said to be drug overdose or something. But so he crawls out of his hospital, September the 3rd or so, and he makes an announcement that Paul is okay, or Paul is not leaving the group, to quell rumours. And he also makes the statement that the band will never perform again. Now, that's an amazingly bizarre statement from the manager of the Beatles.
In public concert. Yeah.
Yeah, in public concert. Thank you. That's an amazingly bizarre thing because musicians love their audiences. That's normally what they live for. They don't live for studio recordings.
Yes.
And people say, oh, it was too stressful. Oh, they're screaming fans, it was too stressful. Well, the Rolling Stones didn't find it too stressful. I mean, they didn't just wimp out just because the fans were too excited. And I don't think that's at all credible. And I think we need to go through with what follows on after that terrific finale, very abrupt, very bewildering. In October, any official Beatles records have record of what happened have nothing whatever happening to Paul. Paul is simply absent for the whole month of October. Okay? Mm-hmm. And then in November, you get this incredibly strange photograph, November the 17th, I think, of a person who we would say is the new Paul. And the main evidence for our whole case is that this new Paul looks unmistakably different from the old Paul. I mean, you could not mistake him for the old Paul. And he goes up to record Strawberry Fields Forever, and that's the first time apparently that the group meets up for recording a song. And then December the 20th, there's the first meeting, a sort of press meeting, in which the group faces the press with the new Paul. And he's rather sort of hustled off rather quickly, but he's there. He doesn't look terribly similar to the old Paul, and so I think that is the sequence. Now we put into that sequence the brilliant insight that Claire had. Claire, if you just allow me to summarise what you argued, that the this is a bit sort of mind-blowing. Anyone hasn't heard it before. On the drum of Sgt. Pepper, you've got the date configured, which is basically 9/11. No, I got this right.
11 he died.
Yeah, that's
So
11
9.
9 as a date, and then afterwards he die, and you have to hold a mirror up to see that. Okay, this is quite a visual thing. You need to see it. It is rather sort of strange and haunting. And so the next big event after the termination of the band, that it would never play again in public, you get this staggering new masterpiece, which is very much people existential in different roles. It's about a circus, Sgt. Pepper, and the singers are all in different roles, as if, which is concordant with Paul having basically landed up in a new body with massive plastic surgery going on. He's wondering who he is. Everybody's wondering who they are. So this new album introduces a new character, Billy Shears, and the reason for introducing it is because I don't really want to stop the show, okay? So the reason is that the show must go on. This group is so vast, it's such a massive national industry for Britain, that you can't just come out with the announcement, sorry, the main singer just died in a car crash and it's all over. That cannot happen. And the band has to go on. And so Sgt. Pepper comes out, and it's got a funeral on the front cover. Now, all of you who've been, got this beautiful artistic cover, and this cover only makes sense. I expect the three of us agree if we see it in this funeral terms. You've got the old band, Madame Tussauds Waxworks, to the left in the picture, and they're staring down at this grave. The Beatles are in flowers, the word written in flowers on this grave, and then in the centre, in this brilliant, bright colours of Sergeant Pepper, you've got the new four lads, and the new Paul is there, and he's unmistakably taller than the others in the group. Whereas to the left, you see them all. They're all much the same height.
Wonderful points. You and Claire have given us a marvelous introduction. We're going to take our first break. This is Jim Fetzer, your host on The Real Deal, continuing my conversation with Nick Kollerstrom and Clare Kuehn about whether or not Paul McCartney was replaced by someone who may or may not have been by the name of William Shepard, which is suggested by Billy's Back by the memoirs of Billy Shears, where there's a couple of versions of this book available. And it looks to me quite fascinating, and I liked everything the two of you were saying about it. Claire, I'm confident you have a couple of things you'd like to say about what Nick has had to observe.
Well, yeah, he was remarking on the timeline, and actually, one thing that one finds, and I'm just because I'm speaking into this microphone, am I okay, or am I too loud or
Claire,
soft?
just do it. Yes, you're fine. I'll let you know if you're not.
Okay. So the timeline has actually been changed a few times. If you go back a few years into the old forums on Paul is Dead, in real time, they were commenting about what they found about the timelines. And,
listen up for the next 5 minutes because I'm going
oh my
to give
goodness,
you something
sorry.
for free. I'm going to...
Okay. And they actually were commenting about how things were disappearing and changing about the timeline. So that's an interesting thing. Also about Epstein.
Hello?
Now we did lose Claire.
Oh, no. Shucks.
I know. What she was playing there was so clear. I wonder if she couldn't play the clips, and then we could all hear them. Because if I play them, you won't. I know you won't. So
Oh, right.
I kind of like that, But now what are we going to do?
My call dropped. Sorry.
So
Are you there?
you're back again, are you?
I'm right back. Yeah.
Go ahead, Claire.
Okay, so Epstein was suddenly very ill or whatever he was, and then gets out of bed for this intense and strange announcement.
Yeah.
It's very interesting that, of course, why was he specifically saying that there were rumors Paul had left the band?
Exactly, yeah.
We also have...
and perhaps I should just say, Claire, that his bio says that the stress is due to a gay relationship he's having going wrong. Well, I'm rather doubtful about that, you know. I think it's the trauma of his band practically breaking up and maybe whatever he had to try and rescue it.
A gay relationship?
Yeah,
Well, he was a gay man.
Huh?
He was a gay man.
Paul was gay?
No, Brian Epstein.
Oh, Brian Epstein. Yeah, sure.
Yeah,
Right,
that's
right.
That's why they say he was in hospital suffering from stress. But I think it's rather doubtful. It doesn't seem adequate to me at all.
Yeah.
I think something totally shattering happened to him that he could never recover from.
Yeah, and that would be the death of Paul.
Yeah.
And the other thing is that years later on the anthology videos in the 90s, Neil Aspinall commented, he was asked, what was Paul doing at the time? And he goes, because he says, George was off doing his Indian stuff. John was in, John and Ringo were in
Spain.
Right, briefly. And Paul, what was he doing? I don't know what he was doing. And it's like he's acting like he's
a revelation that he doesn't realize.
Audience. I mean, of course, Neil Aspinall knew where Paul was. So he's saying there, oh, there's a gap. I don't know where he is. And it's very snarky and leading people into the question, right? So those were just some short things I wanted to say about your timeline issue.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I could continue if you like,
Please,
Jim.
Please do, Nick.
Okay, there's this deeply mysterious new character turns up November 17th, and he's just come back from Kenya with Big Mal, who's the kind of friendly manager of the band, and so he's taken them on, supposedly, and
tell me about Mal. This is a figure I really know nothing about.
Well, he ended up obviously knowing too much. I mean, whoever the new Paul was, where he'd come from, Big Mal Evans would have known. And Mal Evans was about to publish some tell-all book about the Beatles.
Can you tell me a little more about Mel's background? Mal
Uh,
Evans, rather. Background. Was he
not
then
really.
in South Africa where
I
Paul...
can.
Go ahead, Claire.
He was one of the two main roadies from their Liverpool and touring and Hamburg days. The two were Neil Aspinall, who became head of Apple later, the company, and Mal Evans. Mal was a big, friendly guy. He often took the toughest jobs. He helped them a little. He helped them a little bit with the music. Every now and again, he'd be asked to play a cowbell or something.
Yeah.
But he did claim on radio several times that he helped write "Fixing a Hole" and "Sergeant Pepper" with
Exactly, yeah. Those two brewed it up. The new Paul and Big Mal brewed up the genesis of Sergeant Pepper when they were out on this in November, that Kenya tour or whatever. Would you confirm that, Claire?
Yeah, Mal said that there's some indication that they began writing or thinking it up on the plane back. Sir Paul has claimed that. But the upshot is when they got back, Mal fired George Kelly, Paul's longtime butler, before Sir Paul could see him.
He fired him, yeah.
Yeah, gave him no information. This is according to certain leaks.
Yeah.
Gave him no information what had happened. And then Sir Paul moved in with Mal. But anyway, Mal claimed this for years. He never received royalties. And he, 1970...
You mean he claimed that he'd assisted in the writing of Fixing a Hole and Sergeant Pepper?
Television fanatic?
Yes. And...
So he died, it's supposed to have died in 76, didn't he? Supposedly
75
killed.
or 76.
Yeah.
And he was shot dead in L.A., by the claim that he was paranoid and waving an air rifle. But the fact, according to some people, he'd contacted a friend right before that and said, make sure that you get my book and you publish it. The book has never, the diaries have, but they haven't been published, only small excerpts. The book has never been found, but there is a possibility that one page of it is leaked in The Winged Beetle, and I have an entire analysis about that on my blog site.
Oh, yeah. But anyway, there's another good conspiracy theory about Mal Evans that he didn't actually die. I mean, the story was he was shot by mistake, then he was cremated, then his ashes were lost in the post, which sounds slightly kind of humorous.
Yeah, ridiculous.
And there's a theory that he lived on, and there's a book by Malcolm Evans called Signifying Nothing, quite sort of Shakespearean, about language and stuff. A theory that is the same Mal. So it's quite a humorous twist in that story.
I have to contest it. He doesn't look like him, and also there is quite a bit of worry about Mal's book there. And
Yeah.
I think he was killed.
Yeah.
By the way, the fellow who killed him was he was in charge of the squad. Was one of the lead investigator cover-up artists, Higbee, Charles Higbee, who was involved in the Robert Kennedy cover-up. So
Right.
Claire, your voice was perfect when we first began this segment, but now you have changed whatever in relation to your computer, and it's not as good. Can you go back to it?
Okay, can you hear me better?
Yeah, that's good.
Okay, what did you miss?
No, I don't think we missed anything. It was
Yeah, I
just
think
your
we got
voice
it.
was
And
hard
would you agree, Claire? What happened when he died? The all-important bit for our story is that the photographs he've taken of the new Paul in Kenya and on the aeroplane came out, were released, and so we saw what are now in effect the very earliest pictures of this new Paul, who people call Fall. The fake or replacement to Paul, and you can see that it is the same person that then turns up in November in the Beatles recording studio in London, possibly with his ears looking a bit different, but it is clearly the same person, and it very, very clearly is not Paul McCartney.
Well, it's very clear to me, but I do know people who say, "Oh, come on, that's Paul." So, I mean, there are people who can't see the round and sweet-faced original Paul is different from the... They can't. I know people, they can't see the... To me, it's quite obvious, but...
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
they're not inclined to see it. I mean, the mind can impose
Yeah.
interpretations
it's
on the evidence that fit preconceptions.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's why, Claire. That's why I think a science approach is necessary of something like that. You know.
The films were taken in Kenya, and also there's a whole thing that they went in disguise, and no one recognized them at all. Was part of the issue. And when he went to Kenya, I've raised the issue that Kenya was a British-friendly, place. It could well be a couple of spooks, doctors on the take, whatever, nurses could do surgery. And indeed, Sir Paul, has a bag over his head and is pictured in surgical situation as part of those films. So whatever happened there, he received treatment.
Yeah.
Plastic surgery, presumably.
Well, yeah.
Okay, well, Claire, perhaps we can move on now to the September the 11th bit. This is the last documented photographs of the old Paul seem to be the American tour. This is going by your website, and also Tina, the other American lady who's very focused on this issue. That was the last time we saw the old Paul on that American tour at the end of August. And then, according to the urban myth, September the 11th, which is either September or 9th of November, depending on how you read that Sgt. Pepper drum, was the key date. Now, everything we've argued here, I think it must, if it's one of those two dates, it has to be the earlier September the 11th, and the later date in November just came because the conspiracy theory blossomed in America. It was in '69, and that's the way they read dates. Okay, the way you read dates. But here we put the day first and the month later, and therefore that gives us the 11th of September, and I think that makes sense in terms of the sequence we've looked at, just reviewed, and it also makes sense in terms of the anniversary dates that you found for the year after and the year after that. I don't know if you'd like to tell us about that, Claire, the September 11th on two succeeding dates.
You'd like me to review that?
Sure. Get your voice back where it was before, Claire. You were perfect.
Well, this is your brilliant insight, Claire, so that clarifies this issue and links it in a very spooky and weird manner to what happened in the beginning of this century, namely 9/11.
Yes, just let me know if my voice...
No, this is not right, Claire. Your voice is not right. You had it right before.
Hey, is that better?
No, it's not, actually.
Is that better?
Yes.
Okay, now I know where the mic is. It's over on the left.
All right.
Okay, so yes, sorry about that. Just let me know if it's not okay.
Just keep going.
The 9/11 issue is that everywhere except the U.S. has 9/11 the other way on numbered dates, and a year after 9/11, 1966, the Magical Mystery Tour film began filming, and Magical Mystery Tour film and album are filled with Paul is dead informational more clues, and also it's also actually got a cameo of the original Paul in the Wizard Tower scenes. That's the original Paul, the young, boppy, friendly, blah blah blah. But anyway, a year after that, in 1968, yeah, I had to do that mentally there. John Lennon walked into the Abbey Road studios and recorded Glass Onion, the only song to overtly say that there were anything called clues or mentions of this issue.
Yeah.
And he talks about, the walrus was Paul and all these things. And the fool on the hill is living there still. It's probably a burial hill wherever he is.
Yeah.
So these are two anniversary dates that become significant with Paul eulogistic material. And
totally, Claire. And if I could just read a bit of that Glass Onion, just to show, I think, the great force of your argument, okay? This is Lennon, completely different now from what he used to be. He's in a strange sort of fantasy mode. Why is he writing these strange allegorical fantasies? People say, oh, it's just because he took LSD. But I think there's something more to it. He's been shattered. There's two people really close to him who've now gone out into the great beyond, Stuart Sutcliffe being the first. And this is him looking at the great beyond.
And his mother.
And his mother. Okay, yeah. So he's close to sort of the limit of what he can take, really. And he sings saying, I told you about strawberry fields, you know the place where nothing is real. Well, here's another place you can go, where everything flows, looking through the bent-backed tulips to see how the other half live, looking through a glass onion. I told you about the walrus and me, man. You know that we're as close as can be, man. Well, here's another clue for you all. The walrus was Paul. So for me, that is him saying that Paul is out where he can't see him anymore now. And the guy he was closest to, his guy he loved most, his co-songwriter, Lennon McCartney, is now out in the great beyond. And I can't see any possibility that he'd write that if Paul was still next to him in the studio.
I think you're right, Nick. I think you're right.
Even more so, he also gets very insistent. He says, listen to me, right? He's not just, he says, I told you about the fool on the hill. I tell you, man, he living there still. Well, here's another place you can be. Listen to me. There's a very much an insistence in this, just as in Come Together, when he's talking about this dead figure, zombie, monkey finger, flat top, sicko guy, with the walrus gumboot and the juju eyeballs. He also says, shoot me, shoot me, shoot me, shoot me. Some people mistake that as different words, but you can really see his mouth saying shoot me in the concert he did in 1971 or 2. He's saying shoot me. He's upset.
Well, yeah, but he's also saying come together over me. That's like
the grave.
We've all got to come together over Paul's grave.
Right.
And one and one is three. There's only three Beatles left. And also he's so good. Paul was the good-looking one. He said he must be good-looking because he's so hard to see. It's John's surreal imagery, but he can't see any long. His old friend can't be seen any more because he's dead.
He seems to work himself in too. He says he got Ono's sideboard, and he won bag production. Now John was doing these bag things, but also a body bag is. So there's overtones here that are quite ugly.
Yeah. Okay. So I would say that argument of yours, Claire. First of all, it totally puts to sleep the old 9th of November thing, which you'll find on old websites and books about this Paul is Dead story. I think that is totally finished by your argument. It doesn't prove he died on 9/11, but it's a focused date. It's a Sunday, and the Billy Shears book we're talking about says it was the evening of that Sunday on September 11th, 66. How would you say that fits into the story of Paul disappearing then, Claire?
Well, the difficulty is that there are some songs that talk about Wednesdays and Mondays and other things and Tuesdays. So people have assumed...
Your voice is off, Claire.
Okay. People have... Is that better?
Yeah.
Okay. People have assumed that maybe it was a Wednesday or a Monday. But it has to have been September 11th if the date clue is anything to go by. And how does it fit into the disappearance? Well... There are people now positing that there were multiple doubles and replacements.
That's silly.
Or that there were clues planted years before, and even the Billy Shears book, which you said you would like to get to this eventually. We don't have to discuss it right now, but even that suggests that that there was a pre-arrangement or somebody wanted him dead. But the Billy Shears book suggests that he wanted himself to be dead for the band. It's as if it was a willing going.
But that's silly, Claire. We don't believe that. Any more than we believe there were a bunch of doubles and stuff. That's just silly.
Yeah, I think we should keep a minimalist, tone to this argument.
Do you have a view about how he died that evening? Would it have been a car crash? Is that the most probable?
Well, that seems to be every single morning reference is to a car crash. There are people who take the idea all that is disinformation. I think they were facing a car crash. But I did want to say that it's not just silly what that book is saying. It is a cover for Sir Paul, because if there was a murder and it was arranged through intelligence /cults,
then the disinformation coming out as part of the information in those books is a deflection as though Paul wanted it done. So it's
Yeah.
not just a spurious thing I'm mentioning.
Yeah, I mean, I can't help thinking of what people call
Thank you.
Tavistock clinic conditioning.
Claire, if
Tavistock always comes up.
if you found the mic at the left, stay with it, will you please? Your voice is going all over.
Can you hear me now? All
I'm
right.
trying.
Yeah.
Well, what, is your computer floating around the room?
No, I'm in the same spot.
I don't get it.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
We can hear you now. That's fairly good.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Nick.
Well, the Tavistock clinic sort of always comes up with the idea of people being moulded or given alter ego identities. And may I say, the conspiracy theory we've discussed always do involve people being given a new identity, don't they? With discussions of 9/11 or whatever. Who are people really? They're made out to be somebody that they aren't. And there's quite a lot of quotes from Sir Paul McCartney, as if he's wondering who he is. I may just quote, for example, he says, "In a way, I think of Paul McCartney as him. I do wake up some mornings and think, Jesus Christ, am I really that guy that's in the same body as I'm inhabiting?" Okay, in the same body. Then he says, "I've learnt to compartmentalize." Okay, that's what people with double personalities have to do. There's me.
This is Sir Paul speaking.
Yeah. There's me, and there's famous him. I don't want to sound schizophrenic, but probably I'm two people. Okay.
Which, of course, he is.
Yeah, well, she is, yeah. I look in the mirror and just think, I, in this shell, am the guy I've read so much about. I don't know whether it's a schizo thing. I'm very proud of him, that's Paul, but I don't imagine that I am him, because otherwise it would just blow my head off.
Right. He didn't have a transmigration of souls.
No, but there was an identity thing. Hey, can I bring you back later? Yeah, sorry, I'm busy now.
Most people think that that's just about fame.
Yeah.
But of course it isn't. But it's something you would expect a real fellow who's living up to some standard publicly would feel.
Yeah.
And there's an excellent page with a bunch of these things on funny fall flubs at plasticmaca.blogspot.com. So you just type in funny fall flubs. Again, information like this.
Yeah, that's where I got it from, Claire. His quotes, yeah. And he also said, "I joined the Beatles and already set up a fair." Now that's what the second Paul did, of course.
That is more of an issue because they were not a affair when he joined them.
No, he found it. He was a founder. He joined the Quarrymen back in '57. Then he was a co-founder of the Beatles some years later. So there's no way he could remember saying, "I joined the Beatles and already set up a fair." So probably
a fair, F-A-I-R, as in a gathering of events or whatever.
And a fair, A-F-F-A-I-R.
Oh, a fair.
Yeah. So it's as if this new Paul, he's much more sort of intellectual than the old Paul,
Yes.
and maybe some people think he's a greater musical genius. That's the incredibly strange thing.
I think so too. That's just astonishing. Assuming this is all true, it's just dumbfounding to me, and a reason why I resisted and even dismissed the idea where you could find somebody with so much musical talent and genius as we find consistently in both the earlier and later stages.
Yeah,
they represent two different people. It's just one of the most astonishing phenomena in all of musical history.
Yeah. Certainly is. I mean, this new Paul, when he came back to England, got going on Sergeant Pepper, he was conducting quite a lot of people from the London Philharmonic Orchestra, the brass section. Okay, he was making them sound like a circus. Wanted a circus sound out of them, and one of his favourite musicians was John Cage, the modern American musician. Now, I can't quite see the old Paul, the old sort of.
How would he have even had awareness of John Cage?
Yeah, I can't. I've got a funny suspicion this new Paul could read music, had some sort of background, be able to read music. Maybe not, but is a more sort of complex character. And then a lot of the songs come out with these strange clues, the enormous pressure the band is in, that they can't say, they're not allowed to tell what has happened to them.
Well, listen, you guys, we got to take our second break. This is Jim Fetzer, your host on The Real Deal, with my special guests, Nick Kollerstrom and Clare Kuehn. We're talking about the exceedingly controversial issue, but nevertheless source of fascination, Paul is dead. We'll be right back.
We can now say, with moral certainty and considerable scientific authority, that the death of JFK was committed by a meticulously executed conspiracy which was obscured by an extensive cover-up. Murder in Dealey Plaza, edited by James Fetzer, goes to the heart of the JFK assassination. You'll read new and up-to-date information regarding the Secret Service, the Lincoln limousine, the medical evidence, the cover-up, altering the film, framing the patsy, and the silent historians. Also, 16 smoking guns, each one crushing the government's lone assassin scenario. A world-class chronology of November 22nd, 1963. Chapters by David W. Mantic, Gary Aguilar, Vincent Palomero, Douglas Weldon, Jack White, Ira David Wood III, James H. Fetzer, Doug Horn, and a classic essay by Bertrand Russell. The complete story in the pages of one single book, edited by James H. Fetzer. Read it now, read it again. You'll use it as a reference. Murder in Dealey Plaza. Available at Amazon.com and major bookstores around the world. It's murder.
This is Jim Fetzer, your host on The Real Deal. Continuing my conversation with Nick Kollerstrom and Clare Kuehn, we're talking about the controversial thesis that Paul McCartney died in 1966 and was replaced by another extraordinarily talented, even musical genius, possibly by the name of William Shepard, also known as Billy Shears, who apparently had been in a band of Billy Pepper and the Pepper Pots, and that he began Sergeant Pepper of Sergeant Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. And I got to say, the deeper I get into this, the more plausible, the more pieces seem to me to fall into place. Nick, we're going to play some clips here to talk about, which Claire will discuss as visual or audio clues about all this. But what more would you like to say before we turn to those clips?
Well, just that there are certain very clear differences between the old and the new that you and Claire discussed in your previous session. For example, Paul being very left-handed, totally left-handed, and the new Paul then being right-handed and learning very successfully to play with his left hand, but quite often is seen being manifestly fairly right-handed, this kind of thing. And also, I believe the hair parted on the other side, the new Paul. And then one thing you two mentioned was that the teeth were different. I'm a bit puzzled. I wonder if either of you like to say how.
Well, there's some photographs of Paul McCartney where he's got his mouth open, and you can look at his teeth, and they're very irregular. I mean, they reflect, not uncommon in England, very poor dental maintenance. I mean, but the new Paul has a very good set of dentures, and they're all relatively uniform. So I found that quite striking when I noticed it. It was an image on Claire's website. Claire, would you like to add more?
Sure. That information was marshaled for the Wired Italia 2009 forensic study done by the Italians, who are doctors, if people doubt it. What they commented about is that Paulie had a very specific problem. It was such a unique, unusual type of tooth problem that it wasn't to do with his teeth, it's to do with the amount of space in the palate. And because it was kind of crunched all over, it would require not mere orthodontics, which we also know were not done, but an entire palatal surgery, which also was not done and would have been very bloody, requiring a head brace for about a year and so on in 1967.
And could also affect the sound of your voice when you sing.
Well, of course. I mean, it's ludicrous. But the new Paul has one tooth that is out of place. It could very well be a crown on that particular incisor to make it the most egregious tooth be obviously similar. But the rest of his teeth are perfectly straight, long, fine. They have enough room in the palate. The issue isn't that they're just different teeth, which might have a
caps on. There's not enough space in Paul's mouth to do that. That he had a specific problem that makes that a proof.
Right.
Good. No, I think that's a good one. I think that's a very good one. I mean, that's another one that goes along with the fingerprints and the voice prints and color of the eyes. And
then a lot of people go on about the ears looking different. Claire, do you think there was some ear operation to try and get his ears like the old Paul's?
I do. The issue with the ears is a bit complex. We have over 13 examples if you actually understand what skin flaps near an ear do and what real fake ears do when they're sitting against a cheek. We have 13 or more examples of false ears on Paul for years and years. But also, when we do have his real ears, like there are some photos where it's quite clear that he is wearing his own ears. They're later. They seems to have had some adjustment done, but the outer ear cartilage, the angle on the back of the ear remains quite different. And the reason that would be necessary is even if you did a little bit of surgery on the cartilage in the middle, and it is hard to do that. It's not easy to do major adjustments on your ear. But even if you did, the entire ear is a whole shape. It requires, it fits on the head a certain way. They can't completely adjust it everywhere. It's a he has a radically different outer ear cartilage when you do see him with his natural ears. So not to be confused between the false ears and the real ears, but when you are seeing what are the real ears, they have a much more need for space. He's got bigger ears and they're much more oblique angle. When you look on the side of the head, flat at the ear, you will see a totally different angle. I have that there too. And their mouth widths at rest are different. You can't change that with surgery.
Yes, and of course, ears are just as distinctive as fingerprints, so that, the idea that he was wearing false ears is bizarre in the extreme. I mean, if he were the same person, there would be no necessity to do it. I've never heard of anyone wearing false ears other than in this case.
Well, they give
Claire, we lost your voice there.
There are, can you hear me?
Yes, now.
There are people that give the ad hoc explanations that either he did have surgery, they get very upset, he just had surgery for cosmetic reasons, or that that he was wearing them as part of a joke, and that you can explain away everything except the real ear cartilage later being radically different. It's not the same ear shape on the back of the ear at all. But the inside has been adjusted a little bit.
Yeah. Okay. Well, but would we agree that when he first appears in the autumn and winter of '66, he looks very self-conscious. He's got a moustache, probably to hide up scars around the top of his mouth and so on. But then in the spring of '67 and in the summer of '67, he gets to look very confident and authentic. I mean, this is the glorious summer of love and peace. Sgt. Pepper has come out, and the Fab Four are looking pretty good then, aren't they?
Yeah, but he still looks a little bit awkwardly posing to me. I mean, he's flitting about and he's happy to be in, but I wouldn't say he's totally lively, original Paul. It was quite natural in his friendliness and his outgoingness. The same mannerisms.
Right.
Well, listen, I'd like to play some clips that Claire has provided, just to give the order, so each of you will know the order in which I'm going to play them.
Yeah.
There's a Reprise Reversed. There's Blue Jay Way. There's Revolution 9 Backwards. There's Paul is Dead. And there's When I'm 64. Each of these clips is relatively short, so I'm just going to play them all together. They'll only constitute a couple of minutes, and then I'll invite you to comment on them. Is that a plan?
Sure, yeah.
Okay. I'll do that. Stand by. Here we go. Well, that was very interesting. We had 5 different clips played in about 2 minutes' time. Claire, since you had suggested playing these clips, why don't you comment about them and what you take them to reveal?
Well, the first thing I would say... Can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. The first thing that I would say is that some people really feel that these things that are backward are completely made up in the ear of the listener. The reality is that these people who were doing this cover up they were musicians. So one would expect to find them playing audio. So for the larger picture, whether one can see these things conclusive or not, they are likely in there. Now, there are a number of things, if you listen backward through various songs, you may think you hear all kinds of things.
Well, Claire, tell me what you think. Tell me what you think we're hearing in each of these clips, just so we're sure what we're talking about.
Okay, well, in the reprise of Sgt. Pepper, which comes at the end of the album, it was a fake mustache, it was a fake mustache, it was a fake mustache, right?
Okay.
Now that, of course, refers to the fact they were beginning to wear mustaches. They probably were doing it because it would take the attention away from Paul as different. Paul was having to wear them. Sir Paul was having to wear it, of course, for surgery, and because he has a wider mouth, and it changes the look of a face to wear a mustache, right? So it's a kind of we say it's a disguise, but it's not a total cover-up. It changes the way you read the shape of the face. That's actually what's happening. It's not just a disguise like I put a bag over my head, right? And they also had a cutout of a fake mustache in the paper inserts for the Sgt. Pepper album. They were playing around with the idea of fake mustaches. So that's one of them. The Blue Jay Way, actually, the first one is forward. Okay, so the first one is that in the background of the first verse, only on the stereo, not on the mono. So it's in the movie of Magical Mystery Tour, and it's on the stereo album. They're not singing la 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 or yeah 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 in the background. They're not just singing They're singing words, but they're very diminished in volume and they're slightly smeared. So it's not perfect, or else they would be as clear as we're speaking, and it would be too obvious. And what they say is Paul died. Paul is very bloody, but it's Paul died. Paul is very bloody. So it's a little smeared and it's less in volume, but you can hear it forward. On the mono, you only get the last two. The first two aren't in there. And then the other thing that was added in there is a line that's forward. I'm forgetting what the line is now. And then backward, it says, Paul is bloody. So that's twice in that song. And I've mentioned these before. I mentioned it 2 years ago and this year. The reason that it's important.
Oh, shucks.
Yeah, you there, Claire?
So Blue Jay Way, inside the Magical Mystery. Yeah?
Go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Keep going.
Okay.
The reason that it's important, that's what you were telling us, then you faded out.
Yeah, the reason that it's important is that in the movie Magical Mystery Tour, the Blue Jay Way song actually visually shows a car crash. There's a car that comes for George Harrison who's sitting on the ground, playing on the ground as if he's playing a piano that's in chalk. And at the very end, the lights come for him and it's to white. So this is also another link. Though the song is not talking about a car crash, it is talking about losing his friends. And then in these clues are the other side of it, right? Is the
Okay. How about Revolution 9?
Revolution. Well, this was actually the forward is number nine 13 times. Again, the number. Excuse me.
Yes, go ahead.
The number mysticism and all of that we're sort of avoiding so far, but there's also if you play it backward, it is it's more like earn rather than turn. Earn me on and then dead. Okay. Now I was speaking to somebody which is like "Turn Me On, Man." Now, I was speaking to somebody yesterday who just simply refused to hear that "Earn Me On Dead" is "Turn Me On Deadman" with a playing around a little bit, so it's not absolutely clear. I mean, if "Turn Me On Dead Man," hello, Paul died, it'll be too obvious. So it is a little warped. It's a little bit twisted, but it was so impressively suddenly a whole phrase that was repeated that it was a shock to the DJ who was called in Detroit about it. And it was one of the major kickoffs for the idea that Paul had died.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
In 1969.
Totally. Yeah.
And I don't know if in those clips, if you played the actual mix that I was trying to get you to play, but there is also stuff later where Yoko Ono is speaking. John says, he says something like, oh God, I'm forgetting. I'll get it in the break. But and then Yoko Ono says things like, maybe not, and if you become naked, and so on. And at the very end, if you place some of her words backward, it says, "Look at me, Satan." So there's this whole thing about some backwards meanings at times, but not all the time.
And the Paul is dead?
Well, I don't actually know that clip because that wasn't in the one I.
What about When I'm 64?
Okay, well, that was a different thing. What I wanted people to notice about that is if you listen carefully to that one line, you actually notice that he's singing "Grandchildren on Your Knee," but he sings nice British English like Nick's, "Grandchildren on," and then he goes, "Your knee." The "your" is more like a Y-U apostrophe R. It's a Northern English or Scottish slight rolled and clipped sound in that word. And it may indicate that he is actually from the northern regions of England or into Scotland. And he spent most of his life after the Beatles or during the late Beatles in Scotland. He doesn't spend time really in Liverpool. So it's something to notice.
Yeah.
That might have slipped in a little bit as his natural sound a little bit.
Yeah.
What do you think about all this, Nick, this part of it?
Well, there is a story that he had to adjust his Scottish accent, which would have taken a while. But I haven't heard of these sounds, so I can't comment a lot. I could add that concerning his best known song, "Yesterday," sorry, I'm slightly changing the subject, there's a quote from him about this immensely famous favourite song of his. He says, "I dreamed it, didn't believe it was mine really. I didn't even write it really, in a way." So he's sort of haunted by the old Paul and whether he's the same identity. And there is a real overlap of identity between the two Pauls. And the new Paul, I don't think he's a liar. He's trying to be honest, but he has had this somehow personality implanted in him. So he's not quite clear who he is, if you see what I mean.
Yeah. And "Yesterday" may be the most recorded song of the whole Beatles repertoire.
Yeah. So to have him saying, "I didn't even write it really," have him speaking, saying, when he was asked in an interview, "I didn't even write it really," in a way. I think that does show an alter ego coming up. I think there was a lot with Lennon. I've just been reading this book, The Fifth Magician, The Great Beatles Imposter Theory, and that's very much about all these quotes, these meanings put into the albums for people to find clues. I mean, the Beatles were haunted by this situation where they couldn't come out and tell people what had happened because that would destroy them, as it were. And yet they wanted to tell people. And it was so strange. They had this new character in their midst who was quite bossy, actually. This new Paul turned out to be kind of leading them. And I think he also picked them up a bit. They were in great pain and grief from this bereavement. And he picked them up with this wonderful new concept of Sergeant Pepper and sort of rescued the band in a way.
How do we think they found him? I mean, this Billy Pepper and the Pepper Pots. I mean, that was a real group.
Yes. Well, Claire's view is that none of those identities fit. That it's a kind of haunting mystery, and we have not got an answer to who he was before he was Paul.
Am I wrong, Claire? Wasn't there a real Billy Pepper and the Pepper Pot?
There was. It was a local Liverpool band. None of the members actually look like Paul properly, Sir Paul. There are people who, I hate to disparage them, but they start to suggest that people do look like Paul in that band. There's nobody that looks like that, like this fellow. I think there is some suggestion that this Sir Paul fellow actually was involved in the Indica book scene, which has unfortunately overlays of intelligence services all over it. And it was a kind of a utopian, some people like to call it mind control, but it was a mix of stuff: drugs, hanging out, new ideas, free thought, busting old ways. Not all of that's bad, right? Breaking down barriers, but mixed in with pseudo-religious stuff like this Crowley stuff and Ordo Templo Orientis, which is OTO, Order of the Early Order, Temple of the Eastern Dawn, of the East, and that he has said, Sir Paul has said many times about his love of Crowley. He's mentioned magic with a K, which is the way that Crowley.
Well, I've never heard him do that. I mean, I haven't seen that at all anyway.
There's an interview on TV in which he says, well, life is full of magic with a K. Oh, am I being too far out? He also is known to like to put Crowley's images into things. His recent concerts, like in the early 2000s, had Crowley on the screen. And also, of course, Crowley is pictured twice on the Sgt. Pepper album.
Twice?
Go
on.
Yeah,
he's in the top left corner.
Yeah, and part of his head shows it's partly obscured in another spot that's not mentioned on the back.
So who precisely was Crowley? I must admit I'm a bit unfamiliar with him.
Crowley was a hedonistic, drug-taking, self-absorbed, pseudo-religious magician. He was involved in the late 19th, early 20th century in visionary quests. They have overtones of bringing about an evil, if you want to call it new world order or world of chaos and war first and then peace. He said he spoke to the war god of ancient Egypt on the top of the pyramids. And he also was a British agent. He knew a lot of people in the parliament. He turned a lot of them on to, if you want to broadly call it Enlightenment Satanism or selfish free will thinking that you can do anything you want. There is no evil.
Look, I'm not really into this Crowley stuff. I'm not sure it's very helpful to debate that in this context.
Well, Nick, we're not really debating. I just was asking after who Crowley is. And Claire may add one more sentence before we go to our final break. Claire, one more sentence.
Okay. It is involved in the Beatles' story somehow.
So this is Jim Fetzer, your host on The Real Deal, taking our final break. This is my special guest, Nick Kollerstrom from the UK, Clare Kuehn from Canada. We'll be right back.
Stem cell research, abortion, cloning, evolution, creation science, intelligent design. These are hot button issues today. Religion and science, morality and government, corporations and fascism. If you want to know what's happening to this nation this very day, then you won't want to miss Render unto Darwin. After 35 years of teaching logic, critical thinking, and scientific reasoning, Jim Fetzer offers a critique of the Christian rights crusade against science. If you want to understand the issues, if you want to be informed, this is a book you won't want to miss. Render unto Darwin at Amazon.com and the major bookstores. Render unto Darwin.
This is Jim Fetzer, your host on The Real Deal, concluding my conversation with Clare Kuehn and with Nick Kollerstrom about the controversial thesis that Paul is dead, that he died and was replaced on September 11th, 1966 by another person who may well have been this William Shepard, where we have Billy's Back, we have the memoirs of Billy Shears and so forth, in which we've made allusions. Now, before we go any further forward, Claire, I'd like for you to talk about that sketch that John Lennon drew, which appears to me to be the victim of an automobile accident, what have you, and I think you are correct in believing that this is related to Paul's death and may even be a drawing of Paul when he was, dead at the scene, given the wounds that this sketch provides. So I'd like for you to at least begin this segment, this final segment, by talking about the automobile accident, the doodle, and what it appears to represent.
Sure. Well, we've covered that before a bit, and do let me know if my voice changes somehow. There is this drawing that John did. It's not in your average books on him, not even your extensive books on him. It was drawn for actually, we don't know when it was drawn. My hypothesis is he did it closely after Paul's death, in kind of exorcising the memory of it. It was done by splitting a Butcher album cover. The Butcher album cover is Yesterday and Today, which, of course, they were playing around with avant-garde babies' heads and meat. And some people think that even that was already a pre-planned...
Yeah, there's nothing avant-garde about having chopped up bits of meat and babies all around you in a photograph. But anyway.
Well, whatever was going on...
It's an extremely macabre anticipation. I think that's your point, Claire. That came out some months before what we're supposing happened.
Yes.
And it's earlier in 66, extremely macabre anticipation.
Well, it may be an anticipation, or it may have been that somebody else or they were suggesting these things and somebody else was planning to murder him, or it was avant-garde and it became whatever happened, he drew this on a Butcher album cover, but inside the album. Yeah. So it becomes like a little... private memory locket book, like as if you have a locket and you open it up, and it's a drawing. It's a line drawing, very simplified. Parts of it are full of detail. The boots are drawn with Cuban heels and little zippers, and every little tooth of the zipper is drawn. It's very detailed, very tender. The boots are disheveled. They are Beatle boot style. They used to wear black boots with heels and zippers. He also has, he's holding a shovel very loosely, and there is a freshly dug earth under him. He's standing there with a dog to his left that's licking his hand for comfort and friendship. And his head, at least the top half, is drawn with a great deal of anatomical accuracy. Highly simplified, and it doesn't show the kind of knowledge that someone who's a medical doctor would know. But if you saw someone with, let's say, a split along their temple, their middle of their eyes was bashed in, and the top of their head was split open with the parietal bone sticking out, you would remember those salient features, and they're in there.
Yeah, now, it's like the words in Sergeant Pepper. I saw the guy blew his brains out in a car, and everyone just stood and stared. So that's something. It's something haunting John Lennon somehow, isn't it?
Yes, and these are actually very anatomically accurate, because what happens in a sideways head injury, even if you fall on the pavement and you're actually run over, and I have a feeling that might even be what it was, because if you wanted to murder someone and guarantee they're dead, it'd be more likely you'd actually hit them and then hit them directly. But anyway.
Yeah, well, bear in mind, Claire, this is a very classy part of London, around St John's Wood, and have a Beatles car crash and a Beatle dead. I can't visualise that staying anonymous. I don't know where you're imagining it was. Perhaps in the middle of the night, you drove out into the country somewhere.
We don't know. Let's say it was a rendezvous and he was set up. My point is, it's very accurate head injuries, because the top of your head has one big bone in the front. It's called the frontal bone. It's right across your forehead. It's a strong bone. It runs behind your ears and across the top of your nose bridge. So if your brains are blown out, your frontal bone tends to fall back and be smashed up to the side and cut your temple.
Yeah, okay. But what I think you're saying is that John Lennon clearly had traumatic memories, or fairly clear, as if he'd seen his dearest friend somehow wrecked, and this comes out, like you said in the song Come Together Over Me. Macabre images keep invading his consciousness, don't they?
I'm saying something much more specific, which is that this drawing actually is very accurate bone structure problems from a head injury that you wouldn't know if you just made it up. Okay? And it out, Jim asked me about it. It came out in 1971 at the end. He gave it to a young guy who didn't know what he'd got there. He was just happy to have the album and have a signature. And then that guy sold it to an American collector with the other 3 Beatles signatures on it, the remaining other 3. And it's worth a heck of a lot of money. But nobody had commented on the drawing except the DJ who introduced the original fellow, the original collector, to John Lennon under a ruse. And they just said, I don't know what it is. Kind of weird. Maybe it's the Fool on the Hill. I don't know.
Yeah.
So it wasn't until I saw it and said, oh, gosh, the only person in Beatles history who is a car crash victim with head injuries in any way, shape, or form is the supposed Paul Death.
Yeah, Claire, I think you put these bits together very credibly, you know. I think that your story is helping us to make sense of it. And possibly, if I just add recent developments, Ringo was interviewed, I think, last year, and he said, felt Sir Paul is getting a bit too much attitude, says as if he thinks he's the only Beatle. And Ringo said, as a matter of fact, I'm the only Beatle. I'm the last remaining Beatle, okay? And then he said that again, I am the last remaining Beatle. And he was quite clear that it did mean something, and this is quite a significant statement he came out with. And then possibly mention Heather Mills. His after divorcing Sir Paul, she's freaked out by something which she can't explain to the journalist, and this is part of the reason she's been so much discredited by the media. And she said, she was asked, if you know, would you married Paul in the first place if you'd known what you know now? And she says, no, never. And she said there was a lot of fear of the truth coming out from a certain party. Truth of what? And then it was beyond belief, she said. So the puzzled interviewer said, oh, were you talking about infidelity? And she said, no, it's much worse than that. So she kind of looked pretty silly by saying this and not being able to explain what she was talking about. Well, wouldn't you agree?
I do. And the other side of that is that she said she has a box of evidence going to a certain party. She's received death threats through the police. And I mean, that she's heard of death threats and that she's trying to protect Paul. Now, most people I tell this to say, come on, she lied about a part of her past and she's flaky. She made it up. But I think that's far too much of a generalization for the sort of freaked out and very detailed sorts of statements. She also said it drove her to suicide, and he knows that. So she's very insistent about her personal relationship to this issue, whatever it is. And also, people like to attack her because she got a lot of money, and she said, I could get the money anyway. You know, that's not the issue. And also, of course, she's used to a certain lifestyle. So I'm not putting her down for trying to get the money. She was fought on that. But this very specific sorts of statements and her freak out in multiple interviews, I think are very telling. I think she ran across the secret and she didn't have any idea it was, you know.
Yeah, right.
In other words, she was saying if she'd any idea that this was a replacement for Paul rather than Paul, that she wouldn't have married him.
And also, you know, that she's scared now.
Yeah.
But, you know, I mean, this guy is a guy in his own right. I mean, you know, I think a lot of women would be overjoyed to be married to Sir Paul.
Yeah. But also
not with the lie.
I don't know, Claire. I don't know.
Yeah.
You know, this is all very ironic for me because historically, I've actually said to others, the only person I would have rather been than I myself was Paul McCartney.
Which one?
Well, I had
Which
no
one?
idea at the time, Claire. I mean, get serious, right?
I know.
Anyway, recently, Sir Paul was giving an interview, and he was asked about, as everyone does ask him, about his identity and was he a clone or and everything.
Is he
the
being
interview,
asked these questions today?
but well, he keeps being asked that. Well, I think places he goes to.
Does he? You know, reporters are asking him this question.
Oh God, yeah.
I was unaware of this, Nick. I had no idea that it was.
Yeah, he said
confronting it all the time.
Yeah, he said. I think he went to Japan or something. He said asked 1,000 times whether he was a replica or whatever of Paul McCartney. That's on the page that Claire referred us to, where funny quotes from Paul. So I think that is sort of a haunting thing. He's never going to get away from.
Well, I mean, how could the most watched person in the whole world, you know, there be a substitution and not be noticed by a whole lot of people? I mean,
yeah.
I'm taking back to Lincoln's observation. You can fool some of the people all of the time and all of the people some of the time, but you can't fool all of the people all of the time.
Yeah. Well, the interview asked him, the story was there was a very good double taking Paul's place. And Sir Paul replied, "No, well, this is him," pointing to himself.
Right.
This is the one.
Literally. This is him who replaced him.
Yeah.
He was
exactly. Yeah. So literally, he's just confirmed being the double.
That was very nice.
Then you can see him looking very fazed and bewildered by what he's just said.
He slipped up his language. He meant the other thing, but his language slipped, and when he realized it, his eyes dart very quickly. His mouth twitches. He looks very worried for a split second, and it's not a faking kind of a look on the face.
But no reporter is going to pick up on it. They're not going to know what that means.
Yeah, but lest we seem to be criticising him too much, I think we need to affirm that this is a great human being who has contributed to the human race with the Summer of Love and Peace.
He's a musical genius. He's a complete musical genius. I mean,
Sergeant Pepper coming out at that time, 67, when it could have been just catastrophic if what we're saying had really happened.
And look what he did on his own after the Beatles split, and he formed Wings. I mean,
Wings,
you know,
yeah. And Hey Jude.
Any ordinary musician would consider just the Wings part to have been a triumphal career.
Yeah, and Jude, Hey Jude, wasn't that the most successful single they did that he composed?
Well, it was enormously popular. I think Yesterday has been the most, but...
Yeah, and so maybe at this time, towards the end of his life, it may be, he's come out with this Billy Shear's memoirs, which in some way give an inside view.
I believe that's right. I mean, Claire has suggested, ghost written and maybe with some fictional elements, but I think the basic chronology has got to be right.
Yeah.
I tend to agree, and I also agree. I also about not overly impressing people with the idea that this has to be done, woken up to as an attack on Sir Paul. It's why I don't call him fall generally.
Definitely not. No.
But it is true. I mean, they went on with their lives. He's not a robot. He's not a clone in that sense or anything. And he's not just he helped them. He must have also gotten a lot of flack and anger and also thank yous. I mean, ups and downs of relationships here that weren't just about money, and it must have been tough for all of them.
Well,
however,
he made a huge sacrifice of his earlier career, his earlier identity as a person, but he has had a spectacular career. He could never have done this as Billy Pepper and the Pepper Pots.
Whoever he was.
Well, I don't think he was from Billy Pepper and the Pepper Pots, but no, whoever he was, no, you're right. But I was going to say, though, there is a creepy side to this. It's not all nice. And I think that there's a bit of apologizing. And, I want to be very clear that I'm not attacking the fifth Beatle. On the other hand, I'm well aware of the trade-offs and some of the sinister aspect. He didn't cry about John Lennon.
No, right.
He does not seem to have remorse over certain things that happened, like Mal Evans. And I do wonder if he was in on some of that stuff.
You're saying when John Lennon was shot that...
I'm going. I don't want to wait
When John Lennon was shot, you're saying, Claire, that Sir Paul didn't show the right affect or emotional response?
Well, not only that, he actually showed the opposite. When he's asked when he heard about it, he actually smiles. He gets a twitch, like a twitch smile, tries to cover it up with his hand, act as if he's not having an involuntary smile. I think that there are some. He was friends with John. I'm not doubting it, but I think there's a side of this that was ambivalent, deeply ambivalent, and in that I think there were crimes.
Nick,
And it's
do you want
important.
to take care of personal things, and Claire and I will finish if that works better for you?
Yeah. Okay, Jim.
You've been wonderful, Nick.
Yeah.
Many valuable contributions. I'm just delighted to have had you here.
Yeah, been great. Okay, Jim. Talk to you soon.
Thank you,
Yeah,
Nick.
bye.
Hi.
Claire, yeah, let us continue. We got cut off temporarily.
Nick did some wonderful points there.
I did too. I thought so too. And he's a serious guy of considerable accomplishment. He's an historian of science, and he's written the best book on 7/7 entitled Terror on the Tube, which is in its third edition. And of course, he's done scientific research on the Holocaust, which most, more timid souls would never dare. And he's suffered for it. He's paid a considerable price. He lost his position at City College London because of that. And it's all a terrible, terrible aspect. But I think he's a man of great courage, intelligence, and integrity. And I think it was extremely valuable having him as a part of this discussion.
Oh, absolutely. And how many minutes do we have left?
Maybe 10, maybe less. But Claire,
Okay.
listen, let me ask you this. Isn't it the case that Paul was volunteering to do music that was going to support the peace movement or something, and that may have contributed to his demise?
Well, John was the first one to do any kind of social conscience, art, music, pop stuff that was famous of anybody in that way. I do know that Sir Paul did a wonderful song about give Ireland to the Irish or whatever, and that was banned. And that's a cause he took on, and he also took on the cause of animal welfare and vegetarianism through Linda McCartney, his first wife. So when I represent Sir Paul, I am very careful to say to the people who want to love to hate him and the people who want to love him and the people who want to deny that he's a double and all this, I just say, look, he's a fifth Beatle. He's a man in his own right with a family in his own right. He's done great things. He's done bad things. And I think we have to get the record straight about what might have been bad. But that does not, there weren't also regular relationships or strained relationships. I can do both. I know I want to give him full credit, but I think there's a really creepy side to this story, and those books acknowledge it. And if I may just say, they acknowledged it in a very important way. They actually suggest that Paulie prepared to die for the band. Now this if this were if the full story came out, say, and Sir Paul or intelligence operatives that found him or whatever were in on Paul's death, to represent Paul as having wanted to die is actually a really, really sneaky suggestion. It's a way to work in an agenda and yet make it look as though the victim was wanting the bad attention. Even if he was into some esoteric things, even if Paul was into that, and I doubt he was really heavily into any of that, but even if he were, that doesn't mean he agreed to do the switch over, and Sir Paul is hurting just like John. I think John was seriously hurt by it, and I think Sir Paul has a sinister friendship network.
Well,
And I hate to say it because I know he's a fifth Beatle, and I'm really grateful for the music. But
it's an incredible. It's the whole thing is probably the most incredible story in the history of popular music, maybe in the history of music, period. It's just astonishing that you should have, say, a member of an enormously creative, popular, and brilliant band die and be replaced by someone who may even have been more brilliant and creative and take the band to new levels of popularity. To me, it's just dumbfounding.
Well, first of all, the Beatles were already a stunning musical group. Second of all, bringing someone in whose approach is more intellectual musically, like he seems to, as Nick mentioned, want to be conducting and writing formal music stuff. That already means that even if you're not the best musician, you have things that band and Paulie could not have done exactly the way that they were before. George Martin, of course, did compose orchestral stuff for them and with them, but they weren't really engaged in that. But to have a member that was doing it too, that would have changed things, even if he wasn't the greatest musical genius or whatever. And the second thing is Paulie's musical style, though some people can't hear the difference in their styles, but Paulie's musical style is far less, let's say, strained, plodding, and formal. He's much more of like a bluesy player, friendly musician, brilliant, body-moving, out-there guy. It's a different type of interaction and dynamic with the crowd and with the other bandmates. And it's a different trajectory in the music. He's a sweet young fellow, but he's got a serious side, but he's not a serious intellectual artiste.
You're talking about the original Paul McCartney.
Yeah. And whereas the second fellow is more of like, I'm an artiste, I'm a poseur, I'm a, not just as Paul, but like more formal. He's Nick calls it intellectual. It's a form of intellectualism. It's artistic game playing, acrostic, intellectual stuff. He's also said that he loved sitting in the basement of the Indica bookstore and other places with Allen Ginsberg, listening to tracks backwards and listening for meanings and playing with all that stuff. So I think he was actually involved in the Indica book scene. I think he may have been a founder or a funder, and being slightly darkish haired and kind of big eyed. Somebody or his group or intelligence or a cult or whatever involved itself in the murder. And that's why in the most famous band of all Western history comes the most famous bizarre murder mystery, because don't think it would have happened naturally. And that's the dark side. And I'm not saying it to accuse the man of being all bad, not having a family, not contributing great music, not being a fifth Beatle, but I do think there are crimes swirling around this. Mal Evans died, Paul, Brian Epstein, in very strange circumstances. Epstein was found with all the bottles of pills filled, all the lids on, only half a bottle of wine gone, and no vomit, no nothing, just curled in his bed, and yet it's ruled a drug overdose. This is almost impossible. Where is that coroner report? So my point is, I think there was a hell of a lot of creepy stuff, and yet, for the sake of the argument, was Paul replaced? I just represented as we have a fifth Beatle, just to let people know.
Claire. You sometimes get too defensive and complicated and almost apologetic. You've made an excellent argument. I think you've done brilliant work on this. And I have never seen anyone who has been attacked so viciously on a forum and yet stand up for herself so ably. I would like to believe that this interview is going to give all of your critics a whole lot more to digest intellectually, because I think between you and Nick that you've made a marvelous case that the proposition you have been representing is indeed historically true. Jim Fetzer, your host on The Real Deal, thanking you, Clare Kuehn, for being here, and Nick Kollerstrom for having joined us, and all of you for listening. This is Jim Fetzer, your host on The Real Deal, where I have a special show tonight with two guests, Clare Kuehn in Canada, Nick Kollerstrom in the